let's head down under and the news that Conor McKenna has had successive negative tests for COVID-19 after there was a finding which was adverse in the interim, had led to a massive storm in Australia's sports media, and I think beyond that as well. Catherine Murphy is a sports reporter with ABC in Melbourne and joins us now. Catherine, you've been in contact with Conor McKenna throughout this. What has his mood been like as he became a scapegoat for and a lightning rod for a lot of negativity in the Australian media over the last while?
He certainly did become a scapegoat, and good morning to you. It's obviously evening here. I can say that Conor has been so impressive. He has been so humorous along the way, Ger. Like, it's almost been quite comical, because I was in the office when we heard a rumour that Conor might now be negative. So my boss said to me, "He's not negative, is he?" So I just texted him and said, "Conor, you're not negative now, are you?" And he wrote back, "Lol, yep, can you believe it, Catherine? I'm negative." And I was like, "Oh, like, this is huge, Conor. You sure you're negative?" And he's like, "Yep, lol, I don't know what this means." So you can imagine, because it was such a huge story, and the first positive coronavirus case in sport was always going to be a huge story. He's just so unlucky that it was him. So as you can imagine, it's 20 to 7. Our news is at 7 o'clock. I'm racing up to the live area on the roof, and I'm asking Conor, "What should I say? What would you like me to say?" And he's more or less saying, "I've ordered all this food for 2 weeks. What am I going to do now?" So he was just so humorous about all of it. He said that he was still stuck in his bedroom. He couldn't even come out and watch the news, because he lives with his brother and his brother's partner, so was stuck in his room on the Xbox while we went live on the news. And I was trying to contact the AFL, and obviously it's such an unprecedented year, and that's the most overused word in media right now. But the AFL didn't have a plan for Conor testing negative. They had a plan for if a player would test positive. Now today, we know he's had a second negative. The AFL still don't know what that means. And really, it's the first time in the history of sport that the Department of Health and Human Services are more important to the selection of a team than the actual coach. And the coach admitted that. So still deciding what will happen. The chief medical officer or health officer here in Melbourne says that Conor will still have to quarantine, but it's been an incredible story.
I mean, I think it speaks to a load of different things, the efficacy of the testing. The other thing is that it has actually become a bit of a global story. So there's a couple of American football podcasts that I listen to where they were actually talking about this one player who tested positive after 12,000 negative tests in the AFL. Is that 12,000 figure fairly accurate? Because it would suggest that the AFL have got this very right up to this point.
They have. They have taken extreme measures, Ger. So every player is tested twice a week. And Conor was asymptomatic with all his teammates when an irregular test came back last Friday. That was after he tested negative 5 times since leaving hotel quarantine after his return from Ireland, because of course he went home to County Tyrone for a few weeks. So he came back with an irregular test. They tested him first thing Saturday morning. It was a huge, huge shock, because the AFL CEO, Gillian McLaughlin, called a press conference here at very short notice on the Saturday. We heard a rumour that someone had tested positive. I couldn't believe it was Conor. I was on my way to the press conference when I heard. And it was just such a body blow to everything, because the AFL have worked really hard to put incredibly strict protocols together so they can get the game back on TV, because they need the broadcast money. That's where they make all of their money. They've had to renegotiate that broadcast deal for significantly less, and even offer discounts for the next 2 years, because the economy is already so affected by what's happened in this crisis. So it was a huge blow, but they've showed they're determined to keep going. So right now, one of Conor's teammates is also quarantined. Now, you won't believe this. Only one of his teammates from a full contact training session was deemed to be a close contact of Conor's. So his very unlucky wrestling partner, James Stewart, is also in quarantine, even though he's consistently tested negative.
It is
Catherine,
really bizarre situation.
Sorry, Joe. Do you know, Catherine, how many days were there between Conor's last negative test and the inconclusive test that was followed by the positive one?
Good morning, Dave. So there was only a few days. His last negative test was last Wednesday. Then he did his test, a pre-match test, they call it, on the Friday. That was irregular because clearly I'm no medical expert, but apparently the levels in his system were so low that they retested him on the Saturday morning. So only 2 days between a positive test and a negative test, and he had had those 5 negative tests. So it was a huge shock for the club.
So, because the Chief Medical Officer, Victoria, that you've mentioned there, has said one possible explanation is that he had the virus, but there was just the dregs of it remaining, and that's what led to the negative test. But I mean, that's not possible if there's such a short space of time between that whole series of negative tests and the inconclusive test. He can't possibly have had it for 2 days, contracted it in 2-day period, and then it have left his system 3 days later. So he's saying it's highly unlikely that it was a positive or that it was a false positive. But it would appear, and I'm obviously no medical officer, but it would appear that's the only explanation.
It's incredible. And there's so much we don't know. And there's so much that even epidemiologists say they don't know about this. But I did ask the question at that press conference, the AFL press conference. A lot of Irish players came back from Ireland and went into quarantine. It does seem very unlucky to me that the one player who has tested positive in 13,000 tests is a guy who's just come back from Ireland. It does seem very unlucky that he's picked it up at a house inspection or on a takeaway coffee cup. It seems highly unlikely, but again, just prefacing that clearly none of us know, and certainly not in my department, the sports department, which in my newsroom, they affectionately call it the toy department. So I won't be making any medical comments or theories on it.
Catherine, there was speculation that this might hasten his return to Tyrone. Can you quash that for us? Is there anything in that, do you think?
I don't think so, not for now. Conor's made it really clear that at one point he definitely wants to go home, and he's been really clear with the club about that, and they know that. They're disappointed by that because he's an incredibly talented player. I'll be very sad to see him go because one of the highlights for me, he soloed in a match randomly, and it was so shocking. I was at a bar back when we were allowed to go to bars and watch TV and mingle, and I saw him solo on the TV, and the whole bar is like, what just happened there? And I was like, it's a solo. It was the best thing I've ever seen. We'll so miss him when he does decide to go home. But there was a former player who speculated this could be the end of his career in Australia. In fact, there were a lot of former players coming out with big opinions about how Conor's week was going, and they hadn't even spoken to him. All I can say is he's in incredibly high spirits. He's a very strong young man. Helps that he hasn't been able to see any of the TV. He's kept away from media. He's had to stay in his room. He's in very high spirits. He's just looking forward to getting out and playing football.
Catherine, you'll be familiar with the AFL guidelines as laid out as they sought a resumption of play. Did Conor breach those guidelines?
So there's a lot of confusion about this, to be honest, and it's still ongoing. So the AFL are very strict about big breaches in protocol. For example, Melbourne football team had 2 players that went to a party and they were immediately sanctioned. One player, the more senior player, got 2 weeks suspension. The other younger player got 1 week. So they're taking breaches very seriously. Conor did, I believe, go to a house inspection because his lease is running out. It's still unclear whether that was technically a breach of the rules because there are rules in place surrounding being allowed to go to house inspections if you're selling your house. I don't believe they had a provision in the rules for what you're supposed to do if your lease is running out and you want to view a property. And if they had a clear rule, Conor would have been suspended by now. I've spoken to an AFL official who has told me that they are looking at it, but it's not the priority. Suspending him is not really their first priority right now. He may get a week for that house inspection, but the really harsh thing has been the media judged him straight away and almost said he should be written off because he caught the virus. So there's certainly no suspension criteria for catching a virus, and really his actions should be judged proportionately. And I think going to a house party with one of your teammates is certainly way higher up the list than going to a house inspection. So I'm reliably informed by the AFL that he certainly didn't do anything silly. He certainly wasn't out socialising.
And because of the reaction of the media over there, and it's been over the top, to say the least, do you think the AFL will reassess the manner in which they approach these situations? If somebody was to fail a test today, for example, do you think they will keep that name under wraps until they've been able to get through a full investigation of it themselves? Because making his name public so early in the process was clearly very unfair on him.
Well, in fairness to the AFL, I think they have no choice but to name players, because it's difficult to even put into words the level of obsession with Australian rules football in Melbourne. So Conor was selected to play that week, and it was due to be his first game back since he returned from Ireland. So all of the cameras, all of the spotlight was on him anyway. If Conor suddenly disappeared from training or the captain's run, everyone would be looking for him. What's happened to Conor? Has he gone home to Ireland? Is he finding it too tough to be away from his family? So they would have had to answer. And I think that he was so unfortunate to be the first one. But here, the number of reporters, it's completely saturated the media here. You go missing at training, there's an investigation. And I feel they almost had no option but to name him. And also now they've had to name, of course, the other player who is now in isolation.
What's your take on the response to what has happened from the Australian media? Obviously, you know, you're Irish, you wonder, is there an Irish element to this? Was it like, if it had been an Australian superstar, would the backlash against him have been quite so severe? Maybe that's a silly line of questioning, I don't know, but certainly it feels like perhaps we're being a bit overprotective, and actually this is what happens when you're an elite sports person. Your every move is held up to the light. What's your take as somebody who understands how the Australian media works? Were they over the top?
They were definitely over the top, but I don't think it's because he was Irish. I think whoever this happened to, it was going to be a huge story. We did a Zoom press conference with the CEO of Essendon the other day, Xavier Campbell, and I asked him the question. I said to him, do you feel Conor's been demonised by certain aspects of the media, and are you worried about his mental health because of that? And as he said, certain reporters took liberties. In Melbourne, and particularly in the AFL journalism bubble, as you can say, it is a race to be right, to be first, not right. There's not a lot of fact-checking. There are some reporters who skip that part of the journalism process because they're under so much pressure to get that headline. There's a lot of former players in the media with big opinions, and I think that's what Conor suffered from, an AFL sports reporting bubble that is so intense and so heavily scrutinised. Honestly, I can't compare it to home, because I was shocked by it when I got here, because back home we support every sport, you know, and I got here and the level of intensity and fanaticism is like something you wouldn't believe.
Are you concerned about his mental health at all?
No, Conor has told me he's fine. I was really worried about him, because for anyone, like, I know what it's like to wake up every day and your family are the other side of the world. And, you know, the easy thing about living abroad is they were always just a plane ride away. So once borders shut, I think as a human, the first thing you think about when you wake up in the morning is you live in a country and your family aren't here. They're a long way away, and it weighs on your mind every day. So I was worried about Conor having that weigh on his mind, and then the media storm that surrounded him. But Conor's assured me he's doing really well. He's so funny. This morning, I messaged him and said, what's your media statement today? What do I have for the news? And he said, it's tough waking up every day with a stick up your nose. That's his statement for today. He's been so humorous, and you know, the Irish community have really rallied around him. The other Irish players, we all look out for each other. So Conor assures me he's doing well, and his club and the AFL are really supporting him.
Catherine, great stuff. Your reporting on this has been spot on the whole way along, and it has turned into an absolutely massive story, because obviously the NFL are watching to see what happens, the NBA are watching to see what happens, and to see exactly how well the AFL have managed it. So great reporting, and thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Ger. I'm a huge fan of the show, as are my family. So lovely to talk to you.
Where are your family from?
From Cavan. So they're all watching.
Okay,
they're
great.
a huge fan of you guys.
Say hello to them. Say hello to them.
Yeah, say hi to my mum and dad, my brother Richard with my little niece Lily, and my sister Joanne, who's busy at work. So she works on the front line. So she's too busy to watch, but my brother and my niece are tuning in, and my mum and dad, Lily and John.
Tell her to get the podcast on the OTB Sports app a little bit later. Catherine, great stuff.
She will. She listens every day.
And hello to all the Murphys out there in Cavan as well. That is one of those global stories that ends up being a pretty local one in the end. And look, I suppose, Dave, if you're a Tyrone fan, your ears pricked up with that. He wants to come home at some point.
Yeah, and I think any player who goes over does want to come home at some point, and they do see themselves maybe giving their best years to the AFL, but still been in a position where they can contribute, whether it's just to their club or to their county team in years to come. And we've seen Ty Kennelly do it and then go back, for example. But I think it's wishful thinking. This guy is on the verge of being a superstar in the AFL, and it'll be quite a while that they will have to wait before they see him wearing the white shirt to Tyrone again, I suspect.
All right, Dave, good stuff. Thanks for being with us this morning. It's 5 minutes past 10. We've gone a little bit over there, but obviously that was some breaking news to bring you at the end of the show. That is it from OTB AM this morning. We had a brilliant Pat Lam interview from about 20 past 8 to nearly 9 o'clock. Then we heard from Brian Kerr, Jonathan Walters and Kenny Cunningham talking football. Catherine Murphy there on the Conor McKenna case in the AFL. The best place to listen back to our podcasts on the OTB Podcast Network is now on the OTB Sports app, which you can download in the Play Store. Just search OTB Sports in Google Play or indeed in the App Store, and you'll get it there. And it's just really easy now to subscribe to all of our podcasts, and you can personalise your newsfeed and all that kind of stuff as well. So it looks slick, and it's working really well. If you have any feedback for us as well, we'd like to hear from you. Tonight from 7 o'clock, John Giles joins Nathan. Then there's live Premier League commentary of Manchester City against Chelsea. The best place to listen, as I said, is the OTB Sports app.